All right. So yeah, we're gonna go into like a little like example like coding, web scraping. Like I said before, like it's gonna be a little more like me starting from scratch, as if like I never approached this problem. I will tell you right now, I have actually started approaching this problem before with another cohort, scraping adventure. We're gonna scrape a fan base website that they put basically the transcripts in there for this show called Adventure Time. If you haven't seen Adventure Time, it's a pretty interesting show. It's definitely meant to be more like a kid show, but it definitely has some like deep like levels like, into it. So if you haven't seen it, I think it's a really great one to check out, even if you're an adult. But anyway, now one thing I will say, like, like, oh, like, how is this really relevant to like us being like do data science? I think it has some interesting problems that you come across when you're doing kind of like web scraping and stuff like that. So like, would you really like most of the time, unless it's for fun, scrape like a website for like transcript of some show? Well, maybe like if there's some specific thing that you're looking at, but probably not, right? But I think this website in particular has some interesting points. So let me go ahead and
Victor, is web
yeah.
scraping like a big part of what we will
Mhm.
do when we have a job, do you think?
I think it depends. It basically comes down to data acquisition. And I think it all in the sense like if you like the way data science is right now, it's a huge spectrum, right? Where you essentially can go from the full data science lifecycle, all the way from like acquiring and cleaning the data to analyzing the data itself to modeling on the data. And if you think about it, there's a lot of fields or a lot of positions that are actually just that aspect or much more focused on that aspect. So data engineering might be closer to acquiring and maybe some cleaning and setting up that part. So you might be a data engineer if you did just this aspect or mostly this aspect. If you did more analytics, so that's probably closer to data analysts. Though now it's kind of been a little, I'd say that's more focused more on data science itself because there's so much larger data that you have to do beyond like data analysts would typically do. And then the last part, like, kind of the predictive modeling part and deployment would be closer to the machine learning engineer. So like, but the thing is, as a data scientist, you might wear different hats. So some places, like you might be a data scientist and never do any web scraping at all. If you're with a startup, you probably will have to do some web scraping at some level because you probably need to get data that doesn't exist yet. So the way I kind of see this is that like I said before, the highest, easiest way, there's already like a data set, like either a database or a CSV file or something that you can collect from somewhere someone's already aggregated and maybe mostly cleaned into some nice form and using that. The next step is APIs, where someone else also collects this information or is collecting this information and you can pull the information from the API. The last step is usually web scraping, where it's like, this is the stuff that like, no one really has like organized, but maybe it's on a website. And this is the stuff usually as the most interesting problems because they're the things that no one else usually has done. That's why you're web scraping, because basically no one else has that data. So it just all depends on the what you're going to be doing and everything. So yeah, does that kind of answer your question, Lauren? Okay, cool. So it's a good skill to have. I wouldn't stress out being like oh no, like do I need to do this all the time? It probably isn't something unless you go closer to the data engineering side itself and data acquisition. But it's a good skill to have and a good skill to show that you know how to do and when you go into interview. All right, so I'm just sharing my screen on the actual website and I'm just pulling you guys over. Actually, I think I'm going to share my whole screen if you guys are cool with that. Not that you guys have a choice. I'm going to share it regardless. Here's my desktop one. Okay, so I usually do this because then you can see all of my parts that I'm going to end up doing. So let's just go ahead and go right here. All right, so this is the actual website. So this is Adventure Time Fandom. So I'm going to send it on the Zoom chat so that way you guys can all check it out. And this is an interesting little website here. Here you guys go. It's a little interesting website because it is user inputted data. So there is some interesting like parts that are missing, but I think this has about 10 seasons in total. 9 seasons, almost 10 seasons, or a little over 10 seasons, right? With some specials. So you can see this red right here is probably going to represent like missing data. But we'll just go to like a random, episode. And you can see for this first episode, we got some ads and everything. But you can see it's up, says some information about the actual episode air date. Looks like they have production code, so like maybe an identifier of the actual thing. Note that it's not like a nice clear database. This is something that someone had entered in. you can see director, and you see there's hyperlinks to specific parts. So you can probably click on this and actually get something like, you know, where this person, like what they were doing and stuff like that. So extra links. And then right here, oh, you can also see the characters within this episode. So you can imagine, like, if you wanted to see, you know, how often these people occur in the show or whatever, you could actually scrape off of this and say, okay, what are the characters in here, different locations. So note that there are also like hyperlinks for different characters in here. So it looks like the Candy Kingdom is a location. Finn is one of the characters in this episode, right? So you can see like there's some extra links about extra information about them. So you can kind of see like you can get some interesting information just from this page. And then just looking at just the transcript, which is what we'll mostly focus on, you can see here, it's kind of ordered kind of like a screenplay, right? It's like we see who's saying it, and then it looks like they have like what they're doing, right? With this guy. So like in like these square brackets, and then actually what they're saying. And then you can kind of go through parts. And what I'd like to see, or I should like to show you guys, is that when a character first comes into play, they actually have a little link to that character's, who that character is and like information about that character. So we'll kind of see some interesting parts. And then there's also like, there's a character that only speaks Korean, which is kind of interesting. So you can see this kind of interesting Unicode kind of stuff. And then you can see here's the actual translation. So you can imagine like this might be a little bit messier to kind of figure out like if you wanted to look at what they are saying versus, you know, like what they mean kind of deal. You can see here is like, we have information about, you know, what they're doing and stuff like this. They have some interesting words, like you can do the corpusinator serum. They say some random stuff like algebraic, like as like a, you know, as a good thing. So you can see there's an interesting NLP stuff that you could probably do from here. But we're going to focus mostly on acquiring this data, so maybe we could do something later on with it, right? So the first thing you kind of want to do is say, okay, like I get a feel for it, and I want to like eventually get the information. What I want to do is something along the lines of like, all right, I know what episode it is, right? I know which character, and then what was said, and then maybe like the order of what was being said, right? So like, you know, Jake said something first, then Jay or Lady Rainicorn, and then the next person forward, everything. Okay. So first thing I'm gonna do is just kind of inspect it, right? And see, okay, like, well, how is this structured? So you can see here this transcript, right? So I'm just doing expect element. You can see here, okay, it looks like this is where the transcript starts. And you can see here, it's not super clean. There's a heading, which I can find the actual transcript. And then over here is these DLs, right? And DDs, so these are different tags. And you can see within here, it looks like we have some information. So this is like, you know, just like italics. And let's see what the next line here. So this is the next line going through. Question?
Yeah, sorry. So how did you find like right away where that transcript was in the inspect, like in the HTML code?
Okay, yeah, so what you can do, especially with Chrome, and a lot of other browsers have this, you can just go to specifically what you want, and this, right click, and then inspect. And there's something similar for most browsers, and usually this will highlight that specific area. So you can see.
Oh, okay.
Right,
that's really helpful. I missed that part. Okay.
That's right. And then also what's nice too is like if you're like, well, let's say you're looking at this part and you already have this open, you can kind of like scroll over and you can see it highlight over each aspect. And that's kind of like saying, oh, it's this whole thing. Note that it kind of travels up. Like for example, if I go up to the very beginning, this will highlight all of this area and you can kind of like dig deeper and deeper. So for example, right here, it's like, okay, this is the next line, but I want to go deeper. Here, look at DD, and then you can see the actual information right here. Okay.
Thanks.
So yeah, no problem. And so you can kind of see like, okay, like it looks like all of the lines are contained within these DLs, right? But there's no like encompassing like, you know, container that's going to contain all these DLs going forward, right? So you can imagine like, okay, we're going to have to probably iterate over it versus like going within that thing. So we have to probably find, you know, some like point and then go from that point. All right. So yeah, so that's kind of like giving us a good idea of like what's in here and what this looks like. Now we're going to focus on first today. We'll see. I don't think we'll go through doing multiple episodes, but eventually what you want to do is figure out how to scrape one episode and then be able to do that for multiple, right? So like generalize it. So one thing to note is that some of the information, oops, let's go back one there. So these are all the transcript page. So I would go from this page right here and I'd basically try to look for each of these parts. But I do know that there are some, for example, like down here, or if I click on this, there is no transcript. So I think even some of these ones might not have a transcript. So you can see here, transcript's incomplete. So you can see like you might come across this web page and try to scrape it, but there's nothing here. So that's something you're gonna have to consider when we go through multiple episodes. But for today, we'll just focus on the very first episode, just for us to get an idea of how to script this one part. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna move this guy over here so we can kind of check it out. And let me go ahead. I have a, oh, it's over here. So I'm just gonna put this guy over here. I just made a new folder just to make it nice and easy for us to go. I'll make a new notebook. Okay, and let's just call this scrape. Oops, scrape one episode. And so, like we saw before, what we have to do, I'll go ahead and document parts of this. So this is what kind of like, I'm trying to approach it a little bit like how you would do this if you were doing it from scratch, right? So let me go ahead and put the markdown here. We'll just say, you know, transcript, episode 1. So I want to document it well, like at least decent enough so I can come back to it and understand what's going on, right? So we're just going to go ahead and get all the info. Sorry, there's my windows over here. Okay, so first thing we have to do is actually import the libraries, right? So what are the libraries we'll need for this to do web scraping?
Well, you'll need pandas.
Pandas, okay. Probably to organize it stuff would be nice to use pandas. I'll put it as PD. Anything else we need for web scraping too?
Are you using Beautiful Soup or Selenium?
Yeah, we could use Beautiful Soup. We'll use Beautiful Soup since that's from the curriculum. But yeah, we could use Selenium. Let's do from BS4 because that's the actual library. Import Beautiful Soup. Okay. We could use something with Selenium too. How are we going to get this page? So like Beautiful Soup will actually like be able to have us parse through it. But how are we actually going to download that page from the website?
Do we need requests?
Requests, yeah. Yeah. So this is one way we can do it basically. We'll use requests like we did in the curriculum to pull that page. We'll use Beautiful Soup to actually, what's it called? Go through and parse it. And then Pandas is like if we want to organize it, right? Technically Pandas, we don't technically need it for this web scraping part, but we'll probably use it eventually. So we'll go ahead and import it now. One thing too, people sometimes ask me is like, oh, where do you put imports? I usually try to put the imports on the very top. So if I have to import something new, I'll put it up to the top. That way I know, you know, what things I'll need to have. It's a little bit easier for me to see versus like if it's deep somewhere, I can easily miss it. Okay, so.
Sorry.
Yeah, what's that?
Do you need the re thing? RE.
Oh, we might need to use that. So that's regex, right? So we might use regex, for example, to do some parsing. I think we'll try to avoid that. We'll mostly focus on the scraping part. And we'll see if we get to it. But we could use regex, for example, to get specific parts, for especially like in this right over here. Like you can see these parentheses or like these brackets right here that are mixed in with the actual dialogue. That might be useful to actually use regex to find those aspects, like you can see right here. Right, so yeah. But we'll focus first getting the lines, right, just so we can get them in there. All right, so let's go ahead. I like to try to organize my stuff to be like, okay, like let's say pulling in info, or let's pulling in the source transcripts. Okay. And we're actually going to do first episode. So the idea here is that we want to make this a little easier for us to make it modular. So then that way we can just simply change a little bit, put this in a function, and then put it for all episodes, right? So I'll say like episode page URL. And we're just going to directly copy this. Yeah. So now, oops, let's put that in here. So this way, and the idea here is like in the future, maybe we have a function that's going to find the episode page URL, and that will go for each one. This way, it's a little bit easier for us to process it, and versus us hard coding it in there. And then we'll actually get the page itself. So let's do response is equal to request. And then how do I get the page, download the page? Does anyone remember?
.get.
.get, and then the actual episode page, right? So you can see that makes it nice and easy. So this is very clear. So all we have to change is this one thing, and that would be any episode we want, right? And then we'll actually make our soup, right? And just a reminder of how we do soup. We do Beautiful Soup, and then a response .text, because we're just using the text of it itself. And then we'll make sure we're just going to specify HTML parser. Oops. So this should get our episode. We have our episode defined, or the URL for the episode. We get the response. We get the soup. So this should run fine. Cool. So we got everything in there. All right. So next part now is actually like, actually getting like that main page. So remember, we want to find this transcript, right? This is the important aspect of what we want to, what's it called? Actually scrape that one specific, we just want to start from here because we could get extra information, but we're going to skip that for now because we want to get the meat of it, which is going to be the actual, what's it called? The actual lines itself. So the first thing you kind of want to do is like, you might want to check. So let me just double check that I'm getting the right thing. So I'm going to do soup.prettify. So this will, like, if you weren't looking at the website, you could check this out. And you could even save this into an HTML form and just double check that this is the real information. But of course you can see this is, even though it's prettify, it's still pretty messy, right? So we'll still go off of this. So I'm just going to do an inspect element for us to make it easy for us to find and everything. And you can see here is that the first thing I have to find is like, actually, how do I get to this transcript part, right? So what I might do, well, let me ask you guys, how would I get to this point? Like, I guess here, I'll just say my thinking is that I'm thinking like, okay, well, this is what signifies the transcript itself, right? So I might do something like, oh, let me go find this transcript, find this H2 span class. Oh, look, there's an ID. Remember, ID is going to be a very specific, there is no like other transcript. It'll just be just this one right here, right? So I can use that to basically find my specific point. So I can do something like, okay, let's do H2 transcript. Or I'll just put transcript. Transcript heading, right? And that's just going to be, I'm going to find this specific point. So how would I find, using Beautiful Soup, this specific H2? So first we got to start with our soup, right? And then dot, and then how would I find this?
Dot find.
Dot find, right? Okay, cool. And then I want to find that specific one right here. I might do something like, well, I want to find this ID here, right? So the actual tag I'm looking for is span, right? And then I want to specify, because span would be anything that has span in it, right? That's not what I want. I want that specific one. So I can then specify ID equals transcript, right? And that should give me that specific, line right there. Now, if I try doing this, you'll notice that this is not the actual heading. This is just the actual span. But I kind of want to go off of here because then maybe I could go like off next child, next child, next child, next child, right? So I can do something to find the one right above it. What do we call like the tag right above, like that's kind of like encompassing inside of it, the container above it?
Is that a parent?
Good, yeah, that's right, parent. So we can do dot parent here, and that should hopefully give us that whole H2. So you can see here, that's our whole H2. So in this point then it's like, okay, cool, like maybe now I can actually see if I'm at this H2 part right here, what would you call this one in relation to H2?
Is that a parent too, because it's not indented?
It wouldn't be a parent in this case because it's not encompassing. So like this is like the child and this would be the parent. But then what would be this to this one?
Like a new parent?
What's that?
Oh, a sibling.
A sibling, good, right? So like they're at the same level, right? So they're like related to each other in that way. So we can get, for example, let's say like transcript heading. I'll go ahead and comp this out. So let's say transcript heading dot, right? What do we need? How would we get the next sibling?
It's just next sibling.
Yeah, right, next sibling, right? So we can do next sibling, is that right? Okay, next sibling, and let's see what that looks like, right? New line character. And that's because there's actually a new line going next here. So we have to do like next sibling, right? And that should give us this guy right here. And you can see the episode begins, which should be this line right here. The episode begins. So good. So, okay, that's what we'd want, right? And so, for example, you can see maybe we could do a for loop going over each part. Anyone got an idea like how we write this for loop going forward? So let's say I want to go through like the next like 10 siblings. So I'll help you guys on. So I can do a for I in range of 10, right? So okay, we're gonna go through the next 10 siblings, right? Oh my gosh, it's so early for me. All right, so go through next 10 siblings, right? Yeah, something like this, right? We'll say we'll just call it S. This is bad practice, but that's fine. And we'll say print S, okay, or display S. I like display better. Okay, so this here is the next sibling, right? This should, would this work here?
No, you have
Okay.
to call I somewhere.
So to call I somewhere?
Yeah. So it would be I equals transcript.
Like that? Let's try it out, right? This is the nice thing about Python. That's why I tried it like with only 10 to see what happens. And then not quite. It technically worked, right? So one thing I kind of lied to you guys. I could have done this guy right here. You actually could not. You don't have to use this part right here. This could just say, oh, do this 10 times. That's what this for part. So you actually don't have to refer to it. This is a nice little shortcut. But you had the right idea, though. We should still do S. But you can see, even if I have this S, it's doing the same one over and over again. So what's going on here? Why isn't this giving me the next one, the next one, the next one, the next one?
Oh, because you have to like get to, like that sibling, that
Right.
next sibling, that next sibling, that next sibling.
Yeah, so the problem is like this is just doing the transcript heading next sibling. So it's doing the same one over and over. So you have to get the like, next one afterwards, right? So I'm going to call this like last sibling. Okay. And we probably don't want it like this, right? We probably want something like last sibling. So then what will happen here is that we'll basically update last sibling each time, right? But of course, we need to have last sibling defined at the very beginning. So we're going to say last sibling is equal to this guy. Oops. Okay. So the idea here is like, our last sibling was the transcript heading, right? And then it'll get the next one from there, going to the next one. So hopefully then we should see the 10 different lines, right? And we run this. And oh, look, looks pretty good, right? So we got the first part, the second one, okay, the third, and going forward. So it looks like we got everything good. So this is one way you could kind of like go through and then for each one going apart. What might be some issues about doing it in this way? Going by sibling, by the structure. You want to think of an idea? Besides going past like, if I want to get all of those lines, because I want to go through 10, right? But I could go more than that. So what might be some issues of doing it in this structure?
It's kind of hard to look at. You have a lot more than 10, right?
Right, yeah, so one is a lot more than 10. Do I know how many are in here? Yeah, no, right? You're like, yeah, I don't know. Like, who knows? It might be more than that. It could be like 50. But imagine too, if we generalize this, let's say we do count out and figure out, oh, there's 80, lines or whatever. It's probably more than that. But, the problem is like we get to this point, it's like, well, how do we know it's 80, right? It's like, well, we have to figure that out. But then even if we were to figure out that one specific part, you have to do that for every single episode, right? So if there's a new episode with new lines, it's not going to be the same number of lines every time. And the problem is if we go through too many, we might go past this point. So for example, let's just go to like, I'm gonna go from like 120 to like 200. And you can see here, we get to the very end. Oh, we don't even get to the very end. So you can see here, it's still going, right? So we might have to go like, oh wait, I guess we have to go through like there we go. So you can see here, we keep going to the very end, revive more candy. Like we can go through the whole thing. We still have to go through all of it. So like you can see like this would be a really annoying process, right? So one thing I say for web scraping is try not to rely on structure going forward. Try to use the tags themselves, right? But I just wanted to show you like one possible way you could go through it. And this might be like the initial part because it's kind of like how you would look for it. But this is a little harder to deal with. So there's some ways we can fix that, but an easier way with Beautiful Soup anyway, is actually just find all the points that we need. And if you notice here, all the points that we have are all DLs, right? All those DLs are the actual transcripts itself. So you can see here, this is the last one, and then we go to paragraph. So it looks like if we just find all DLs, right, we'd be pretty safe. A similar thing might be DL with a certain class if there were specific ones, but it looks like this is just all DL, and I can double check that. But since I've looked at it before, I know it's just all the transcripts. The DL lines are only for transcripts. So I can do something like, okay, let me say transcript lines. So transcript lines is equal to soup, and then I want to find not just a DL, right? I want to find all of them. So I'll do find all. Oops. DL. And if there was a specific class or ID, I could put that in there. But since there isn't one, as you can tell, I'm just going to put find all DL. Okay. And so now I have all the transcript lines. So let's see transcript lines. And you can see here, I get a list now of all the different lines going forward. Okay. So it's like, okay, cool. About a decent one. You can also check out how long this is. You can see 218, so I was close. I would have been able to get close to like the 200 part, right? So this is a lot easier than to find specific number and try to count that out. So you can see here, use the structure to your advantage. This also tends to be a little bit faster if you have to go through it yourself and everything like that. So, all right, so we got all the line, we have all the DLs here. And now let's go ahead and actually take a line, like we can imagine the very beginning here. Okay. So I have the very first one. I'm just going to look at the first line. So let's say like line is equal to transcript lines. Oops. And let's get the very first one, right? So we can see the line should be, oops, helps if I put the E there. You can see here, this is the whole line, right? So we want to put this, we're going to pull the information out from here. So someone tell me how can I get the info from here? What I really want is just like this guy. Right? So what can I do from here?
Can't you do like a find for line?
Yeah, so we have the DL here. We want the stuff that's in the DD, right? So like you said, Lauren, we could use find. We can probably do find DD here. So we can hopefully get that point. And then you can see we just got this part, which is good. That's what we want. Right, but you still have this DD here. We really want the stuff inside here. How do we get just the stuff inside of a tag?
Is that dot text or dot strip?
That's right, a text, right? And so we get just all this stuff right here. And then you also mentioned dot strip, which is also useful. That will get rid of any white space, stuff like that. So you can see that new line character goes away. So now we get this whole line, which is exactly what we see up here, right? And it's kind of, let's see if I make this smaller. Yeah, you can see we get that line. So cool. Awesome. So this is how we can get each line. So now we can put this in a for loop, right? Now, one thing we might want to do is actually store this in the list, right? Of saying like, because we want it nice and ordered, right? Say this is the first line, the second line, the third line, right? So a list would make a lot of sense here. So I'm just going to put like lines equals this, so an empty list. That way we can build it up. And then I'm going to do a for loop, right? So how would I build this for loop so I go through all of these transcript lines?
Did you say for line in transcript line?
Perfect, right? So we're already naming the variable in here. We can actually get rid of this guy now since we already have line. This is kind of like how you want to build things modular. So that way it's easier to kind of put it in. If you try to code everything by hand, it'd be a lot more difficult, right? So line transcript lines. Okay, and then we can do line.find this part right here. So this right here, saying the line, maybe you want like, I don't know, what do we call this, like line text. Okay. And then we want to append it to our actual list, right? So lines.append. Okay. So you can see here is that now I have, this nice little lines here, and I'm appending it over. So now if I have this, it should go through all of it, right? And let's go ahead and run that. And so it ran pretty quickly, right? So let's check out, remember how many lines there were? So remember how many there were?
218.
Yeah, 218. So we should have the same amount in this lines here. And sure enough, we have 218. So that's good, right? So let's check out just to see, what these look like. So let's do lines. Let's do like the first 12, right? And you can see here, it's a list of them. And you can see here's the first one, the second one. Cool. So we get that whole line right here. Okay. So this is good. We get basically each line. So we're already like, we don't even have to think about this website anymore, right? Like we don't have to think about this part. We just have all the info that we care about. But there's some issue here, right? So let's say I want to say for like a transcript, it'd be nice to have like think of our data frame, right? What would our data frame look like if I were to like save this information here? What kind of columns would we be looking for?
maybe name and then what they say, and then if they have any sort of oh, you're actually putting what they say.
Yeah, right. I'm just putting notes.
And then an action. So if they are performing an action.
Yeah, I think that seems good enough, like action or maybe description or something along those lines, right? So yeah, so you can see here, like, okay, we want to get the name, right? So we can see there's someone who says something, and then what they say, which is all that extra stuff, right? And then probably the action would be something like in the square brackets, right? Okay, so you can start things like, okay, like how can we kind of split this up, right? So let's go off of, I'm going to say let's go off of this one first, because this is obviously a little bit different structure. We'll talk about that in a second. But let's go off of this very line 1. So the first spoken line. So you can see lines 1, it says, Jake, yeah, it's great. So you think you're pretty way up there, but I can get to you. And then he says something, right? So let's focus on just like splitting up like the name and like what he says, right? And we can figure out actions maybe another time, if not today. So how could we get just this person's name? Separate this out so we get just Jake.
You could do a string split on a colon since there's only one colon.
Yeah, good, right? So let's do this as I'll call it line to line text again. So yeah, line text, right? And I'll say, okay, let's do line text dot split. Then we can do a colon, right? So we can do this. And we can see here we get Jake. Cool. Awesome, right? Now, one issue we might have, and I'm just going to add on here just for fun. Is if we have a line that has multiple columns, right? We might have it split multiple times. We really just want to split out on the first one, right? Which I think Jenny had it just right. So you can start thinking about other ways you can do this. Like I think split's actually a good choice here. But like, okay, like we want to really tell split and just like only the first one, right? And so what's nice is we can just look up, like, well, how does split work? And we can actually check out max split. So we can say how many times is actually going to split up. This is where, it's always nice to check out the function and see what you can do. And you can see the maximum splits to do. -1, basically, there's no limit. So that's the default. So in this case, we want to do a max split is equal to 1, right? So just 1 split. So let's try that. You can see here, now we actually get just Jake and everything else. Okay, and this is good to like think about these kind of parts, because if you forgot this, you might later on, I know there's something where there's multiple colons, you would get some weirdness and then you'd have to like debug that. So it's always good to think about like how can you break it by accident, especially with like web scraping. There's a bunch of ways like people might do things that might mess it up, right? So cool, we got our line text, and then so we have basically our Jake, our person who said something, and then what they said. So we'll call this, is it speaker? Sound good? And let's call it, we'll call the next part what they say. So
Speech.
What's that? Speech. There we go. That makes sense. Okay, so we have our speaker and then the speech, right? And then note that we also include that actions in there. So we're not considering, we'll do this as speaker. Let's do display. There we go. Speaker, and then let's do display. What's the next one? Speech. So you can see here, we get each part, right? Awesome, cool. And note that we get the action, but that's okay. We'll figure that out later, right? But at least we have it separated out. So let's try this out for multiple ones. So I'm just gonna do the next one because I know they won't work, is we do 0. So line 0 is gonna be this line right here, right? So what's gonna happen, you think, kind of predicting what's gonna happen, if we run this code on line 0, what's gonna happen with the speaker?
It'll be line 0.
Yeah, so if we run this, it'll just be the actual line itself, and then there won't be any name, right? So I think this will actually give an error. And the reason why it's giving an error is because there's not enough. But just to kind of show you, let's just do this. You can see here, it's just basically just giving that whole thing, right? So that would just be the speaker. And then at the worst case, it would actually fail, right? So that's not really what we want, right? So you might want to put in some extra parts like, okay, like, well, let's imagine if we're going through a for loop in here. So let's try to build this for loop just to kind of, see how it's structured. So we'll do the same thing again, like for, we'll call it line text, right? Because that's what we've been using. Line text in lines. And then we want to say, like, consider if, what would you call that? Like a narration, I guess, like.
It's like a stage direction, but
stage direction.
Stage. Yeah.
Okay, let's call it stage direction. I like that. So consider stage direction, no speaker, right? So you want to make sure we don't consider that as an actual speaker, or maybe you want to call it, I don't know if you want to call it anything, but we'll call it like no speaker or something like that. And then otherwise split it, right? Speaker and speech. So this part we know, right? So we can actually put this in here. We'll call this an else because we're probably gonna do something like an if here, right? So we'll do if here. And note that this code would break right now, but we're just kind of filling parts in. And we can do something like, so we can do this, right? So, okay, so we know this would work for most of the lines, but there's some lines that won't have this. So how would we maybe do this part? Like, how would you maybe do this? And there's a few ways we can do it. Any ideas?
Isn't there like a contain?
Oh, what's that?
Or am I making it up? Like if it contains, so if a line text dot contain, I don't know if I'm making this up, but
Just try that. It contains, what does it contain?
The colon. Then
So
like just,
if not,
right, then you would just print that line.
okay, let's try that. So print line text, right? And then we'll break it here just to test it out. So since we know it's the first one, we'll just stop it right there. All right, so let's see what happens. So looks like didn't quite work out, right? So contains, it's not gonna quite work, right? I believe, does anyone know what went wrong here? You might be thinking here, so if this isn't here, or, so I think that's kind of like what you're thinking, right? I think there might be something similar, but I usually don't use it. But you can see here, not in. And that would get the same idea. So, and that's okay. That's some stuff I can go through. So you can see, okay, good, this cat through. So this is definitely one way you can do it. Let's think about ways we can break this, right? It's always important to say like what ways it can break. What ways can this break? It doesn't do what we expected.
Maybe one of the stage directions will have a colon in it at some point.
Yeah, so maybe there's something.
Gary picks up these things, the apple, the orange, and the banana or whatever.
Yeah, so like maybe like it's something like, I'm just gonna put it randomly in there, right? The problem is that this would actually not catch those points, right? So like, okay, like that could be something important. What anyone else got another idea how we can like, and this is like the hard part of web scraping, is like, figure out like what cases would make the most sense.
It kind of looks like the freestanding stage directions all start with a square bracket, right?
Good, right? Yeah. So we can do something like,
yeah, like the same thing that Lauren suggested, just instead look for something that starts with a bracket.
Yeah, so maybe not like it's in there, but more like, does it start with this, right? So we can do that too, right? So good. So how can we, there's a few ways you can do this. How would we actually check if it starts with a square bracket?
So starts with method, right?
That's right. Maybe is it starts with, I forget. So you have to look up stuff too sometimes, but you can do it this way, right? So let's, oops. Okay, so let's see if it starts with this. So this should catch the very first one, right? Oh, maybe not. Looks like starts, is it starts?
Try with no underscore. I think it might be all one.
Oh.
I think ends with is all.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, see, confusing stuff. Another way you could do this too is you could do something like line text 0, right? Because the very first one is equal to that bracket too. That would also work. But let's keep with this method since that's what we put in. Okay. So it starts with this guy, prints through. Now, technically, this can still break, right, if it didn't start with that. But I think we're pretty safe in the sense that like what we're getting the feel for it is maybe there's some extra space, so we did the stripping out of extra space. Maybe in some other ways they're going to do something different, but maybe at least we'll keep this part in here, right? So we can talk about like maybe next time if we wanted to continue this thing before we can say, okay, how would we do tries and stuff like this and catch exceptions and stuff. But we'll go with this for now. So I'll put a little note here. It's like could break if not a speaker, or a square bracket. Stage direction. Okay. So this is a nice thing kind of put in there to like note those parts that could mess up, right? So cool. All right. So note that we're going to always have that speaker and speech part. So we probably should have something similar for this part. So who should be the speaker in this case? We'll just manually define it.
Maybe a narrator.
Okay, so that would be possible, narrator, right? Okay. Other things you could put in is maybe like, you know, stage direction or something like that. One thing you could do, you could just put none, right? What are some disadvantages of putting none here in the overall thing?
If you try to do something to that data where a none type isn't going to be tolerated, then you'll get into trouble.
Yeah, so you might get some issues in there. You're basically making missing data on purpose. Like it's kind of a good idea maybe to make it more specific since you're the one creating this data set. So you might have something like, you know, a narrator. We'll stick with that since that was what you said. But this also is important, like maybe there's something different that we find later on in some other transcripts where it's not someone's talking, but maybe it's different from these square brackets. If we just put none, then that might also encompass those parts and it would be easy to identify them later on. So it's nice to be putting this here first. So that way we say, okay, this is a narrator and we know what a narrator does in this case. Okay. So anyway, cool. So we have these parts. We are getting the speaker, we're getting the speech, speaker speech, right? And now we can actually do something with it. So if we want to save this information, right? So save info. So how could we actually save this info? We might have to modify some stuff above too. So maybe I'll kind of help you guys out with this then. So one thing we could do is basically just have a list of tuples, right? So a list of tuples of being like speaker and speech. You can make this like a dictionary saying these are all the speakers in the speech and they have them in a certain order. So the dictionary would be like key to a list. I'm going to use a list of tuples because I think that makes the most sense where we have them in order and then each of those things in order have specific parts. So we can start here with like lines. What do you want to call this here? Say data, data lines. All right. This is where like you get really lazy with programming like names and stuff like that, but at least they're unique. So data lines, we'll have this as an empty list, right? And then saving the info, we'll have data lines, append, right? And then we'll append speaker and speech. So one thing I like to do is I like to put this separate. So I could like data like this, and then put data here. This way, in case if I ever modify what I want to save later on, like I modify this code, it's a lot easier versus like going in that specific part. So I can just change what data is defined here and then go from there. Okay. So this is like trying to think ahead. So let's go and check this out and let's go add a new line after that. So let's try out data lines and we should hopefully see some parts. So cool, we can see narrator, Jake, all that stuff. If we wanted to, for example, we want to look at just like the very first part, the very first, I'm sorry, thinking like, we want to look at just like the first element. We just have to say, oh, for each of these parts, get just the first part. That would be more like a NumPy array and stuff like that. But we can actually convert this into a data frame, right? So does anyone remember how we would actually create this into a data frame?
PD.dataframe.
Then what do we feed into it? I'm just kind of saying that's so one thing is like, you're not sure, just feed something in it, right? Say, okay, let's say we'll do shift tab, right? The first one's data. Let's just put data lines, see if that works, right? Hey, works out, right? You can see here it's like, well, 0 and 1, that might not be the most descriptive part. So you say, okay, well, we want to define the columns. Oh, it looks like there's a columns part. So we can actually define this little documentation. Maybe columns is equal to, and then we'll actually call it something, right? So it's a list. Let's call it, what's it, speaker. And then the other one is speech, right? So there we go, right? With this nice, beautiful thing. And then we can do some interesting stuff, right? So now we can actually check out, it's like, okay, well, let's see df, let's see, speaker dot unique, or I always mess this one up. Okay, so you can see who are the unique people. Okay, you can also do dot value counts, right? You can see here, Finn speaks 67 times. We have the narrators 49, which kind of makes sense, setting up each scene and everything like that. You can see all these different parts. Zombie Love Heart, for example, only speaks 1 time. So again, a really great, like just looking at the version first episode, it's got an interesting, colorful cast of characters and stuff going through here. So anyway, you can kind of check this out. You can then look at, for example, if I want to look at, let's say the speech, for example, speech, we can get all of these parts and see what they're saying and stuff like that. We can say like when it's not, if I wanted everything that's just the narrator, I can get just those parts. If I want to get just the Lady Rainicorn, right? So let's say if I want just Lady Rainicorn, how would I do this for kind of reviewing for a data frame? So I want to get just what Lady Rainicorn says.
You could do df bracket df speaker equals Lady Rainicorn.
Yeah. Speaker equals, and then I'll put Lady Rainicorn. Oops. There we go.
Do you need
two equal
signs or just one?
I'm sorry?
Do you need 2 equal signs?
Oh, thank you. 2 equal signs, and then that'll be our df, and then let's just get just the speech. And so I'll use the same kind of format, speech, right? You can see here, this is what she says. So she doesn't say very much, it looks like, but both in Korean. So you can see here, we can kind of see going through. If I want to change it now, it's like, okay, let's say we want to just see Jake. You can see what Jake says. We can do like, let's say, Princess Bubblegum. She seems like she's talked a lot. So you can see really quickly, we can go through and you can see about this is the 210 line. So he says pretty much stuff to the very end. So this is how you can kind of put this together. Then you could go from here saying, okay, let me put it into a SQL database. You can basically convert this over to keep this in there. You can also, in this case, like if you wanted to make this part more, like as we expand into more episodes, we can say, okay, also collect the episode number. And that way you can also refer to the episode. If you collected information about the episode in a different table, you then can refer back to those parts. And then if we want, you can see here like the different actions within, let's say like this right here. You can see there's multiple actions. So maybe that's something that you would keep out as like you could take this speech now and like say, okay, let me find, these parts with the regex saying just this stuff that's in the square brackets within speech and go from there. You can see that she giggles a couple times. So cool. All right. Yeah, so that's kind of like a quick intro. And you can see like this is 1 episode now, but now we can just basically, we could expand this out further to more episodes by encapsulating basically like these few parts into an actual function and then make a new part. So yeah, any questions, anything that you guys want to ask about specifically that we went over? Okay, cool. Yeah, so is this something you guys like kind of seeing a little bit? I think the web scraping part, like to be quite honest, we don't go much more into web scraping. Like this is the, we don't talk about web scraping anymore from the curriculum itself. This could be something that we could go revisit and go explore more, like how you would go further in this and keep this information. So yeah.
I think it's really good. I think that's a great example. And, I wish I'd seen that from the beginning. I mean, meaning, I've seen it before. So but this is really like, I like how you went through your thought process and everything. So thanks a lot, Victor. I think it's very helpful.
You're welcome. Yeah. Yeah. And this is one thing I didn't do it so much because it's kind of tough for me to talk in, right? But I'll try to put like comments going through. And that's something I find really important, like, so I can go back to it and understand what I'm doing. If I leave things like this, I might get confused, like, why did I do it this way? This is where comments are really useful.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Okay.
Okay. So I'll go ahead and stop this here then.